Yeah, we can start. No?
Yes. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. So happy to see all of you together. Otherwise, we have these study meets twice in a year whenever we have PTMs, parent teachers interaction. But I think class one teachers are more enthusiastic, and you have initiated these extra sessions, and we are really really happy and really happy to be part of this session. Now I request Gopalan uncle to take it forward. Thank you, Gopalan uncle.
So, namaste everybody. Uh, Last time we talked about security and we said we'll continue that thread today. What I'd like to do today really is connect it in ways that connect up to our actual experience of the last 40 years, and in the process I would like to bring up to you, in front of you, mistakes which we have made. If in understanding those mistakes you are able to do a course correction, then some purpose is served from that. So with that intent, uh, it becomes a rather serious discussion, but I think those questions are in your lap today. We have crossed that stage. So if you can benefit from understanding these mistakes that we seem to have made and how you should avoid them, then there is some gain from this meeting, I think. You know, many times when you come to the school, you must have seen some of these giant banyan and peepal trees, and they never fail to impress you when you see them or stand under them. But there's a very simple lesson which we forget from these banyan and peepal trees. The people who planted them, they didn't see the tree flowering in their lifetime, and they didn't even have that idea, right? Today, more and more, when we do tree planting, we plant quick growing varieties so that we can see its fruit in our lifetime. Are we planting any banyan trees which will be there for the future children and grandchildren? That means do something for which you don't see the result in your life, but you know that that's the right thing to do and you've done it, right? And I would stretch that into this area of security. See, a baby feels completely secure just being held by the mother. It doesn't ask for anything more. Why does it feel secure? Because just that physical contact with the mother gives it the feeling that I am inside an envelope which is greater than me, and therefore I am safe. This is the newborn baby. Now when you come to the adult at whatever age, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, doesn't the sense of security come from the same feeling that I am enclosed by something that is greater than me? But at that age, I have come to understand not just the physical, I have come through the intellectual, and I understand this inevitable fact that there is something beyond just the body and the mind. And if I am enclosed in that, what is there to be afraid of? Right? So, Krishnamurti in his talks never referred to the supernatural or the greater energy or God or any such thing, but he used one expression, that which is beyond matter. Our physical body and all our thoughts which emanate from that physical brain are all in the realm of matter. Is there something beyond matter? Obviously there is. You don't need any explanations for that, it is there. To inquire into that is really religion and spirituality. But these two words, religion and spirituality, today The moment you bring up this word, what comes up in front are the sectarian images, whether it's Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist. It starts from there, and we miss out this very important thing, that religion and spirituality is really the exploration into that which is beyond matter. Now, just 5 days ago, I watched a 10-minute TEDx program by a professor at Essex University, and he came up with these statistics to show that 100 years ago, 98% of the American population were into religion and spirituality, at least an exploration. Today that's come down to 33% or something like that. And he was arguing that there is no going back. And his logic was that drop in the percentage from 98 to 33 is not in the older generation. They haven't changed. It's the younger generation who are not into it at all. And they are not into it because they haven't been exposed. Right? They have grown up in an environment where they haven't been exposed to this. This set me thinking, and I went back into my own last 50 years and the mistakes that we made. Right? See, from first standard right up to undergraduation in Christian college, I studied either in a Catholic or a Protestant institution. I never went to any of the others. I was the first generation student in our family to go to English medium schools. Right? And family was very enthused about all this English medium and this and that. Today, the only language I can really think in is English. I mean, I converse in Hindi fairly well, and I learned to think in Hindi because of staying in the north. But mother tongue, if you ask me today, is English. Right? And you can see the extension of this today even more in modern society. And this is not a problem that's peculiar to me. It's all the English medium schools in India are in this boat, where the languages, the Indian languages, second and third they are called, are relegated to one corner, taught in a way where the children are guaranteed to say after class 10, thank God, no more language. Right? But apart from that, hardly any exposure to the wealth of the literature that's available behind these languages. But all is not lost. Even if you can't understand the language, there's a phenomenal amount of English translated material available. But who's interested in this? What brings this interest? And this is the mistake I think we have made. I have distinct memories of a grandmother. She was my father's aunt. She was widowed at the age of 12. So my father was given to her in adoption. And we used to visit her in a remote village. No electricity, no running water. She lived alone till the age of 70. So once a year we would go and spend some time there. This lady never had any fear. She lived alone. Never had a problem of boredom. Never had a problem of depression. And what was she doing from morning to evening? She was doing one bhajan after the other. And she spent time with that. And a few years ago, I spent some time in Bir in Himachal. I stayed in a monastery. And the monastery, the place where I stayed was an old age home for former monks of the, I'm sorry, the electricity is going, there's some problem. Until it comes, you will only hear me. So, I was staying in an old age home for retired monks. And they had a meal truck which came in with just a simple meal, breakfast, lunch and dinner, very light it was. And they spent the whole day there with just their prayer wheel, and you never saw them a bit of boredom in their faces. Not once. And it was amazing, and they always a big smile on their face. That was a lesson to learn, really, watching those old people in Bir. I spent 7 weeks there. we couldn't converse because they didn't speak Hindi. But we communicated enough every day when we went on the walk around the stupa, and they did their morning and evening walk, and you saw people who had grown with really a deep sense of security. They were not insecure about anything. And today we are seeing our young children, depression coming in at what age, and then we say attention deficiency, and we label problem after problem after problem. And I'm connecting up to what this professor said. Is it that they are growing up away from the inquiry into a religious mind because they haven't been exposed? And I asked a very simple question to myself. Do we light a lamp in the house every day? If we don't light a lamp every day, do we light it on some special occasion? Why do we light it on a special occasion? Obviously, the lighting of that lamp has some symbolical value for me, otherwise I won't light it. But the moment you start lighting a lamp, what is the next thing you do? You don't light it anywhere in the house. You keep a particular place for it, you clean it, and the children are growing up in that environment. So, the generation that I come from had the benefit of seeing this happen with grandparents. They followed their routine, but we just happened to see it. Today's generation don't have that contact with grandparents. So what are they seeing? Right? Please understand, I'm not going back to saying that traditional values are better and that lifestyle was better. I'm not looking at all that. I'm just saying some things even at a scientific level make sense. If you happen to sit quiet every day for a short while, please try this experiment. You sit one day for half an hour very quietly, and the next day light a lamp and then do sit quiet. Experiment whether you feel a difference. You don't need anybody to tell you. You go by your feeling. There is something about the simple act of a lamp burning. Right? No scientific explanation will be available, there is no logic, but it's there. There is something about keeping that place clean, taking care of it. Morning you clean it up, etc., etc. And then this whole thing of, human beings are living in this cycle of the sun and the moon, right? There is something called a bioclock in us. We don't need a theory to explain that to us. So, if traditionally they have said Brahma Muhurta is between 4 and 5:30 in the morning, and the Panchang tells you every day what is the Brahma Muhurta time. Even scientifically, is there something about a body clock which says that the brain is at its peak energy and alertness at this time of the day? And if so, should we be making use of that? Now, to do that, unless the whole house is doing it, it doesn't work. So, we had a former parent of the school. He's a very well-known urologist now. He was here for a few days. And in talking over that, he's made this point. He said, when the children are at home, I religiously do my puja in the morning. Now the children have qualified, they are doctors abroad. He says, now I don't need to do it. I do my quiet sitting, that is enough for me. But if I don't do it when the children are there, how will they get the feeling that this is important if parents don't give time to it? So I need to do it when they are there. So his granddaughter was here, and for 1 week he very religiously every morning did his puja in the morning so that the granddaughter would see it. I think there are questions for us to ask in this, and the mistake we made, I should tell you that. We came to the Krishnamurti school when I was 31 or so, okay? And through all this education and success in the corporate world, we didn't believe in all this traditional, and we dropped all that. And we came into the Krishnamurti school. We listened to Krishnamurti, and we thought, here is a man throwing out all this, any practice, anything, no belief in any tradition. This is what we thought. right? That is the mistake we make, because that's a misunderstanding. We take one sentence from Krishnamurti and we think we have understood it. There's much more. And as you study, you understand what vistas it opens there. So today my study, for example, is, there were these three contemporaries, Ramana Maharishi, Aurobindo and Krishnamurti. Three people talked exactly the same message, but they talked it in such a different way, we think one is contradicting the other. No, there was never any time to do this kind of study right through the younger days. I am lucky that despite all these mistakes that we made, our children somehow found a balance. They haven't gone off track. But sometimes, you have no anchor, and that's when you have problems. And life must bring its vicissitudes to everybody. How do you get the strength to meet that vicissitude? Unless you have that anchor, and that anchor can only be that which is beyond matter. How does one bring this to the child? Because there's in a sense, a reward in doing it. Once you have brought it, there is no insecurity. Things may not be this smooth all the time. They may go up and down, but there is no insecurity. And that's such a weight off the shoulder. Today, I think today's child is going to need it more than ever. Because from what we know today, if you look at their future 25 years from now, we don't know what kind of jobs they're going to get. We don't know how to get them prepared. The world is becoming more competitive. It's becoming a more difficult place to live in. How do you prepare them for this? Unless we have given them this anchor which will hold them whatever be the storm. And how do we give them that? That's really the question I had today. And that to me is the religious question. So, how do you touch or explore that which is beyond matter, which is beyond our intellect? But you can't leave it just because it's beyond the intellect. And somewhere the seed of that has to come into the child. The seed of it. It will flower when he is ready. But if we don't sow that seed now, are we doing the right thing in our responsibility as parents? That's my question. I didn't mean it to be so serious, but I felt that it's important, at least at this stage, when you are in entering class 1 and you have 10 years ahead. This is, I think, the time to explore these questions, because you set the direction for your child for the next 10 years in this way.
So I think we can only, express to our children what we really are either practicing ourselves or what we draw comfort from. So something they see us doing on a day-to-day basis, and probably this sort of understanding that everything cannot be fixed. Not everything can be fixed just because we want it to, just because of our intellect or because of some effort of our mind. And there is this, the result is not always known, but we try, and this sort of whatever practice it may be, but like you said, Gopi, about going beyond yourself. So these things we as parents face on a day-to-day basis, and I think what you talk to your child about and how you respond is what you personally do yourself. And of course your child has their own path to explore and to figure out. But for example, if I don't have an answer, and the way I talk to my child is, suppose my child is anxious about something, and I say, look, our mind does this, it gives us a lot of what ifs, and makes us get really worried. And sometimes we're not able to fix it with our own mind. So what helps me is I just pray. I just pray that, it sorts itself out. And just the act of praying eases it out for me. But that's something personal. That's what I do. And my children see me doing that. So I guess it's the only way you can bring it to your child depends on how you respond to things not working out in your day-to-day life, and how you meet life yourself, and what you draw your strength and support from. So I don't think there's any practice as such, but probably, like you said, the understanding that there's something beyond me and I can feel comfort in that. So my attitude is, let's pray. Let's pray and hope that things ease for us. Whatever is going on with our mind cannot sort out for itself. And this is expected. This is every day, that life will keep throwing things at you. Things will not work out the way you want. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't even know if we are alive the next day. So the best I tell my children is, let's pray if we are not able to sort it out ourselves. I don't know how helpful it is, because finally everybody will choose their own way of feeling comfort. But yeah, this is, I think it's important what we believe ourselves.
So you brought up exactly the two things which I was trying to communicate. One is, it's very important that children see what we do. It's not enough that we do it inside. They need to be able to see. And the other is, as I said, one of the mistakes that we made, we listen to Krishnamurti and we hear him in his talk saying, to whom do you pray? Sir, you pray to you, a creation of your own mind. And we hear all that logic and we say, so prayer has no meaning. Is the conclusion we come to. 2 plus 2 becomes 5 in our minds. Right? Is prayer only a begging for something from a greater power? Right? And if you go into those prayers, most prayers, if you notice it, are only words of praise, because the intellect cannot do anything more. Right? In every religious scripture you will find this. The prayer is only how great you are, because you have qualities which are beyond me. Why are we going through that? For somebody it may be an acknowledgement that I am too small in the order of things. Somebody else may feel that if I do it, my burden will be eased. There may be whatever reason. But then comes the next question, do I only pray when I have a problem? That is that doha, right? Sukh mein dukh mein sumiran sab kare, sukh mein kare na koi. So if today I don't have a problem, does it mean I don't think about that? So somewhere, this is what children, I think, need to do. They need to be able to see it in the house. If they have a grandparent in the house, that's good for them. Generally, they will be in contact with something which we are not providing. But when we don't have the grandparent, it becomes even more important to make sure that that dimension is open.
Thank you, Gopalan sir. It's always a pleasure to hear you and your thoughts. One thing that I have realized is, try to put it in words and see if it makes sense to everyone here. I think, and you talked about religion and the anchor and the absence of it essentially. But if you look at it, what religion has been able to do is create in a massive scale, at least in this country, it's been able to create a lot of seekers. And that's in my opinion, something that's been missing for a very long time. It's missing from a lot of other cultures. In their own way, they actually seek, but especially in India, I think that's been a role that religion has played for a lot of people. In fact, they have their own. Everyone seeking is very different. I happen to be in the presence of one of my gurus in Himachal Pradesh, from where I learned yoga and all that. He used to keep saying this fact that seeking is the most important thing, even more important than religion or being spiritual. Just the ability to seek something, and be in that structured process of seeking. Everyone seeking is different though. So I think that's one thing that anchors, at least has the ability to anchor people. It doesn't have to be religion, essentially. In the context that we understand, religion is in fact very different and very vague now. But that ability has been lost over the last generation or so. That's something that we can pass on to our kids, our children. That's a beautiful gift also. I'll just end there. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. But see, what is it that we will pass on? We can only pass on the fact that whatever we have, we still have unanswered questions. And therefore the questions keep coming up. Right? Whether the question is a simple thing as what makes the sun rise at a fixed time every day, or the question is somebody else saying, look, the entire world is a projection of your mind. When you go to sleep, where is the world? The answer is not important. It's the question arising and then it remaining behind in the mind. In a sense, having its own action. So, what you are saying is it important to raise these questions in different ways? In conversation, in one's living, in a practice that one follows, whatever.
Like one thought that I've been having is, like I really feel that, children, I mean, that if you're talking from the perspective of children, they sense us, whether as educators or parents or just, when we are around them, they sense us more beyond what we actually do or say in front of them. So what I feel is like, let's say if I pray or I meditate or I do yoga or I hug trees or I'm doing something for the environment or whatever that would mean, like that the energy which is bigger than me, I can express that in so many different ways. I think children will feel more what it does to me in a larger sense, not just while I'm doing it. So let's say even if I spend 10 minutes meditating every day, I think it's nice if children can see that. But also I think they catch on to what am I doing the other 23 hours of the day. I think that way they are so sensitive and they will see more like, oh, let's say meditating every day does all of this, and even let's say how well can I embrace my own insecurities or my own fears or my own doubts and own confusion in life. And I think if I can be honest with myself and authentic with myself, I think I feel like that way children, they really see through, and they catch on to that energy. So I think it's so much like, and I'm not disagreeing to anything that has been shared, but I also feel like it's, and I don't also think any one of us is seeing it, but I feel like if we just do things to show children, I think they might sense that as well. I think at the end of the day, we have to do it for ourselves, like even that whole path of education or whatever, if I could first do it for ourselves, what does it mean for me? And then bring it on to the children. And in the opposite way around, it's also like, when you are with children, it is such a wonderful opportunity to kind of look inside oneself and see like, okay, why am I feeling like this, or why is this making me feel insecure, or why am I not able to cope up with this? So it's, it's like, they are mirrors, they can see you, and I feel like if one allows oneself, they are also mirrors to like, they show the inner world, what's actually going inside oneself.
Gopalanka, I think I have a more of a question. Rather being reasonably, I'm not able to reason out how today I believe in something or a faith, right? Like let us say something we root ourselves to, or we anchor ourselves to something to reason out the unanswered, let's say, and that's something we are calling as a necessity, so that there is a sense of security. I somehow grew up in an environment where my grandfather would not pray. I mean, he was almost like, I mean, he that allowed us to explore a lot more. He wouldn't discourage us from exploring, but my mother is extremely religious. I had a grandfather who wouldn't step into the puja room. So this whole the definition of, prayer in the way we believe, but he would still say, okay, sit quietly for some time, observe something, right? So that whole aspect did not go away, of sitting with yourself or focusing or observing something, or somehow did grow up with, like, your own image of what is faith, to be able to. Now I actually don't know what I and Anand are doing as of today with respect to creating that environment where do we visibly do some things explicitly to show that, okay, this is what we go back to when we are not able to reason something, or when we are not able to maybe finding it difficult, or is it only those desperate situations, or you're generally trying to use religion purely as a form to fall back on, is something I'm kind of not taking that the thread in that sense, like, do we need is it okay for the child to form, or is it easier, like, let's say in mathematics we usually introduce a placeholder, a variable or something, an assumption, when it gets very complex, saying that, okay, this is part A, and then a lot of things becomes easy to reason out once we assume something, we assume x equal to 1, and then the whole thing gets solved, and then you come back and say it can't be anything else, but it has to be 1, right? So there are ways of solving complex bare assumption, a hypothesis, and then coming back. So are we using the form of prayer and religion that way, that the child gets introduced and later the child finds its own way of faith? Is that what we are thinking as a possibility here, as an environment?
See, I'm holding that one line of that Doha. Dukh mein sumiran sab kare, sukh mein kare na koi. Why? If I can lift the understanding of that one line, that's enough. So I'm not talking of the prayer that I'm resorting to when I'm in distress. I'm talking of the prayer that I'm resorting to, or a thanksgiving. See, in many cultures, I think it still is in a lot of places, before you begin a meal, you say a prayer. What is that prayer? It's an expression of gratitude that today we have got our meal. It's an acknowledgement that it is not our effort which has brought me. Now, you may call it grace in the Christian culture, you may call it a particular shloka from the Gita here, but whatever. Some people just sit quiet. A moment. I'm saying, now, unless that is consciously done, it doesn't happen at a meal time. It doesn't matter if you're eating alone or if today the whole family is not. Before we begin a meal, we spend one moment. And with young children around, it is easier to structure it around a particular shloka. That's how the shloka comes in. It's not that the shloka has a great sanctity in itself, but it becomes the prop, in a sense, the variable that you talked about, right, around which you gather it. You draw
a placeholder kind of a thing.
That's it. So it goes back again and again to our living and lifestyle. See, sometimes I have seen this happen many times, when when school talks about this, there is a feeling that comes, who are these people to tell us how we should live our lifestyle? Right? Understandable. I am not preaching a lifestyle to be lived. I am only saying, is it my responsibility as a parent to ask, what is the environment that I should provide for this child when he is at home? That's the lifestyle, is it not?
Yeah. And we do believe like providing that placeholder or is an essential thing to do when they're too young, because they won't be able to comprehend otherwise.
See,
like most of us.
No, when they are young, they may not comprehend intellectually, but there is a very different quality of comprehension which is happening. And that is why that seed is so important at that age, right? Because it goes levels far deeper than the intellectual. And it sprouts later. It's very difficult to put that seed later. So I can understand what that professor is saying. That these young people who have dropped out of the religious question, it's very difficult for them to go back. Because they haven't had that at the appropriate age.
I think also when it comes to a practice, I think we've all been conditioned to follow religions and everything from the time we were kids. But then as we grow and we come across different kinds of situations, I think what helps is, I think, forming a practice where on a daily basis, we sort of, it's like brushing our teeth, right? So in the morning when you start brushing your teeth, and when we start with something, it could be like meditation or chanting something, just making it a practice on a daily basis. And then our children watch us do that. And then in those times when things when you feel low or something goes out of whack, I think then it's almost like falling back on something which is already something that you're used to doing. And I think that sense of peace, which sort of automatically falls into place. And then when kids watch us doing that, then they also, we probably can encourage them to, to continue to do so. And I think somewhere they understand that when things go wrong or when things are a little difficult, they kind of fall back on it. Like when I've followed the Buddhist practice, so with my daughter, she's been seeing us chant from the beginning, like at a certain time in the morning and, in the evening, no matter what. And then, whenever something happens and she's like, maybe we should chant, Mom, I think, we find whatever answers we're looking for. And I think very often we tend to strategize, like maybe if we do this, then this will go, well. And after a point, sometimes you just realize, we're just strategizing too much and there's something so much bigger and, bigger out there that where we just sort of, instead of begging, like we've kind of been used to, like if you're writing an exam and you beg whichever God it is, like, please let me pass this exam. And then finally understand that maybe if we just make a determination saying that, I am going to do this well, or this is going to come to me, I'm going to find the answer to whatever problem there is, and sort of be mindful at that point and sort of be in silence and, kind of focus and center ourselves and, kind of thing. And then I think when children watch us do these things, they do tend to realize that maybe if we just sit and maybe practice the pause or try to sort of, focus on just staying, silent and taking action, and yet not thinking too much about the problem, but just sort of just being there in that moment. And also another thing I've noticed is that sometimes when we tell them, to just focus on moment to moment, like our actions and thoughts and words, and how we manage to conduct ourselves, just, every step of the way kind of thing. So I think for them, then they don't really need to look so far ahead, where just that moment, if they've done something wrong, they sort of reflect and say, maybe I shouldn't have spoken to that person in the manner I did. And, just kind of reflect slowly on each thing as often as, we can, I think that sort of makes us so much more mindful. And then when things actually go wrong, we're not so distressed. And I think when sort of kids start from a very young age, somewhere I think they find their peace. I think like some of us, I think have learned or tried to learn it a little much later in life. But I think with children these days, this kind of, like you said also, Gopalan uncle, that they don't always have their grandparents around, and then they look at us and try to see what they can gather. And like how Janani mentioned that during that period of time, we're at peace and all of that while we're doing whatever it is that makes us feel at peace. How do we conduct ourselves every other time? Because it should sort of gel with what we're doing, whether it's in the morning or at night, to find our peace. Because they're constantly watching, and we realize only when they get into trouble of any kind, in the sense, or they feel distressed, how or what they resort to make them feel, a little better. So I think that mindfulness, I think if they watch us sort of, watch ourselves, or even comment on how we might have behaved or what we could have changed or something like that, maybe that sort of becomes a practice, from the beginning, if that is, if we make that a point to kind of think. It's that's what I feel.
See, whether we like it or not, parents are going to be role models for their children. We can discuss indefinitely, why do you follow, why do you need a role model? But from a very young age, the parent is the first role model. And therefore, any dissynchronicity is jarring, and it's going to have its effect. So what you are really talking of is integrity. You are doing one thing and saying the same thing. You are saying one thing and doing the same thing, right?
Namaste Gopalan sir, Ravi here.
Yes, sir.
Every study meet session, there is one of the other, not takeaway, but a result which becomes stronger. And I think with this session, one thing really I have to do is light up a lamp, which you mentioned. Because lighting up a lamp, when you said, it definitely brings up that positive energy if we sit and observe. And when I try to figure out what is that brings the positive energy, what I could find is it generates ether around it. Please correct me if my understanding is wrong or something.
I am no authority on all this, sir. But as I told you, if you do that experiment, I have seen it, that when you are sitting in front of a lamp, there is a different quality that day than when you are not sitting in front of a lamp. Now,
yes.
See, the other things that we are losing out because of our getting caught in this English culture and losing our tradition. Today is Kartik Purnima, right? And here at the study center, they are lighting lamps all over the place. Okay, now in a city environment, we can't do all that. But on that Deepavali day or on a festival day or Kartik Purnima, if you put 4 lamps outside the house, right, then that festivity gets a different connotation for the child. Sure, you may identify that with the particular delicacy you had that day, but something else also gets identified. Now, what are these festivities? See, deep down they all have a deeper significance. We may only remember the superficial one today, but that memory unfolds and reveals deeper layers later when I'm ready for it. So somewhere I think we need to also ask, see, if all festivals are connected to that particular religion that we are following, there's no festival which is not connected to a religion. So we don't have to make it a ritualistic celebration, but can we get the deeper essence? So every festival invariably will have this victory of good over evil. That will be one symbol, theme which will always come out. So it's a recognition of the fact that there are both these forces out in the environment, and we are going to be meeting them every day. How do you start differentiating one from the other? All those things, the questions work inside. That is the planting of the seed which I am talking about. Which means that I have to be investigating these, thinking about these stories, what they mean to me today, what does that celebration mean today? Is Deepavali just bursting crackers or something more? So you see, it's a journey, not just for the child, it's a journey for the adult also. And unless it's a journey for the adult, it won't be a living, vibrant thing for the child.
Very true, sir. And today's question, what you brought up is, how do we bring, and it is a totally a spiritual question which is beyond religion, faith or anything, getting into the deeper sense of life. And in fact, it is what we have, that is our purpose, and before we end our life. So there is I don't get the word for that. What I mean to say is, pertaining to this question, how do we create that ambience of spirituality at the younger age? Because when we started to know about this, it was almost 35 years. So if we could, and after that, there are many scientific things also involved in it, we later got to understand. And we thought, oh, we wasted 30 years of not even beginning it. So it becomes important so that we create that ambience for the child. So it starts nurturing within it. And what it fundamentally meant to me when getting closer to life, bringing in the quality of meditativeness or devotion or reverence. When we say prayer, it is basically reverence to the divinity, whomever we pray, or quality of. So bringing closer to life, in a sense, we are the fundamental composition of these 5 elements, Panchabhutas, what is food, water, food, water, air, fire, and space. So that the more we are closer to the natural elements, when it comes, so I got lost in communication.
We are talking about how to get the child imbibe all this.
More than more
how
than,
to get the child get closer to this 5 elements. One is eating natural things and the water, air we breathe, and this lighting a lamp itself is the fire element, along with this cosmic energy, whatever is there, the matter beyond the physical you touched upon. So even that element is created through this physical means of lighting lamp, isn't it?
Yeah. But the question I'm asking is, is our exercise and effort to ask how the child will imbibe this, or is it a living question for me? If it's a living question for me, the child will imbibe. So I don't have to worry about the child. Right?
That is true. Yeah.
So I may not have thought of this earlier. See, on this business of prayer, we have gone through tremendous upheavals, right? Because I have sat and listened to Krishnamurti saying, "Sir, you can say Coca-Cola all your life." And people said, repeating mantra, this, that, useless. See, this is what Krishnamurti said. What he was only pointing out was one aspect of how the mind can hypnotize itself. Right? I have recordings here, 1970, 69, 70. He was younger then. He used to come to Rishi Valley. And at Rishi Valley, he used to talk to the students. So 15 minutes before he talked, there would be some chanting by the students. And you can hear Krishnamurti chanting. He has just come after 1 year. He comes to India, right? And he is chanting with the students. He is going ahead of them actually. In fact, the Shruti doesn't match. He is going off in his own way. The mic is recording it. But we say, this man said, all this is bunk. You're not supposed to do it. We create ideas out of that. So I think this is what I meant. These are some of the mistakes we have made. See, there is another mistake I think we are still making, not just in our Krishnamurti school, all our English medium schools. I've raised this many times. I haven't got an answer. Let me put it to you. Think about it. Right through school, from my first standard to college, nobody ever said namaste. It was good morning, sir. Right? Because I went to a coat and tie school, right? It was good morning, sir. Nobody ever said gracefully how to say namaste. We don't feel it important. Why? That's one. An even more serious question, which for our intellectuals it is a big thing there. You know, in Indian culture, there is this culture of doing a Shashtanga Namaskara, a prostration. We will not do it. And the arguments given to me have been, why should we bow to another person? This is one argument, right? Krishnamurti never prostrated. He didn't encourage it. So why should we do? So he's become authority for us. We omit all that at that point. But you can again experiment with this, because I've gone through this. I'm telling you, when you do a prostration and your forehead touches the floor, the sense of I comes down. You can experiment with it. You don't have to accept what I'm saying. Right? These are simple experiments, but you see, because we somewhere have moved away from it, we can't do it now. We feel very uncomfortable doing it. Until you experiment and say that, look, there is something in this. The only way this ego will get it is you touch your head to the floor, then you understand, hey, you're nobody. So, it's your journey actually. So, I don't think the emphasis and the focus is in what do I teach my child. I don't need to do anything. He is going to learn whatever I am living. So, what am I living? It comes back there. Anybody else have anything to say? Because this has become a very serious meeting. I have something else to suggest.
Gopalan sir, I have an interesting thing to share. I mean, people have been talking about practices that we can, do to help our children. So I was just going back in my childhood and try to understand what did my parents do to give me that sense of anchor, sense of security? Because they did not deliberately try to do anything because they were not aware. So what did they do? So I'll give you an example. I mean, just a small anecdote from my childhood. In college, I used to go to temple every day evening, and I used to go to not pray to God to give me good marks, but I would go to temple, sit there for 5 minutes, and then just come back. And I would do it increasingly as the examination drew very close. The point was not to go to God and ask Him to somehow get me a rank, but the point was, I used to feel that anxiety because I used to study very hard. I used to really study hard. So I used to go to the temple just to sort of offload my anxiety, saying that I have done my bit, but I know things can go wrong. I've already done my best already, because tomorrow is the exam. I can't do any miracle today. I've done everything I could. And now there are things which can happen. And it does happen. Sometimes I used to miss the first rank. I used to have goals and, all those things. But I used to go to the temple to offload that anxiety to, sort of in that place and say that my part is over and I'm willing to accept whatever is going to come my way now. And I'm not going to be perturbed with it. So I used to find a sense of peace. And then I would come back home and then finish my study. So it used to really help me. So it was not about going to God and praying that, there is something, very serious happening tomorrow, help me get the score. But these practices, somewhere we learned, but I don't recollect my parents ever teaching me that, you got to have an anchor or, maybe something that the way they lived their life, maybe I picked it up somewhere. I can't put a finger to it. So, there are so many things that we could do. We learned how to say gratitude. But I can't go back in my life and say, where did we pick these things from? And I don't have any answers to it. So I guess if we live our life authentically with a lot of integrity and I think our kids will pick up, a lot of things. Just an interesting thing which happened. I just recollected it right now. I thought I'll share it with you.
Actually I second that, because a lot of times when I go through a very troublesome day or emotions that I don't know how to process, and if I ever sit down for meditation, initially I would kind of keep our son Chirag out of the room because he would be such a huge distraction. I would kind of bolt the room door and try and get some silence for myself. But along the way, what I started to do is he would anyway come and constantly bang on the door. So I started letting him in. And then, he would come, hug me, and, he would do so many different things. But when he understood that I will continue to do the best, because I was looking for some resolution of some emotion in my own heart and mind, he slowly started understanding. And now so many times when he wakes up in the morning, if he sees me meditating, he will not disturb me. I can sense that he is awake because, there's a lot of movement and a lot of things starts happening, but he doesn't disturb me. I think he has come to understand that, okay, if Amma is sitting down for meditation, she needs that for herself. I am yet to see that seed take any sort of, root or sprout leaves, but I'm sure that it will come at a right time for his own life. So that is true.
I have one thing to add, Gopi. Yeah. This moving away from spirituality and religion, there is this program online by Yale University, and I wonder many people have already seen it. It's called The Science of Happiness, and I went through that program just to see what it's all about. So it is done by the psychology professor at Yale, and addressing the same symptoms of depression and anxiety in young people nowadays. So there's this course which they do, and they realize that simple things like gratitude, and like you said, that dukh mein sumiran sab kare. So gratitude, practicing gratitude, and also when they were given some money to spend, and they had a choice either to spend on themselves or somebody else, and when they spent it on other people, they felt happy. So there's this thing about doing something not only for yourself but for others, and practicing gratitude, and so many other things which increase happiness, including having time on your hands, having leisure. When that's the other thing which was mentioned in that course. It was quite interesting that these simple things make us happy, and one of them, which is not related to any religion, was just the feeling of gratitude on a regular basis, writing it down in a journal, the thoughts of, just thanking the universe or whatever, So it was interesting, that course. If anybody's interested, they can look into that. It's called The Science of Happiness.
Anybody have anything to add before I give you something for next meeting?
So Gopalan, when you started off with saying that there's something beyond self, and that understanding itself is very very helpful. And when Ravi was talking, I was thinking, the moment you say, okay, I have done my best, and then, but that doesn't mean that whatever I want is going to happen, that there are things beyond myself which are which are doing things around. So even that itself, that feeling that I have done my best, now whatever happens, itself gives you such a release in itself, that and if you don't have that kind of expectations of time, so I don't know whether following any ritual, asking God for something, all that may not be very specifically important. It's different for each one of us. But I think this feeling that things in the world are not in my control in the end. There are a whole lot of things that can happen.
Yeah.
In itself, to accept that will itself bring a lot of peace, is what I feel.
Anybody else like to have a last word before I say something for the next meeting? I presume you want to continue this meeting.
That we have to figure out. Yeah, somebody will have to say whether we want to.
Yes, Medha, you wanted to say something.
Well, I think there's a whole shift of paradigm when we look at the way things, when we talk about religion. At a very practical level, when we see how it works, especially if you live in a community, a lot of people are ashamed of their own practice. Just to give an example, people in my apartment are very happy to celebrate Halloween. It's not that I'm against it. This is a very small example I'm giving. And it was followed by Dasara. So when we asked the kids to go to different houses to just see the dolls, not even the god per se, just this, they felt so ashamed to go. So where are we coming from when we talk about feeling ashamed of celebrating certain thing, or say we are going to chant something? Why should we feel ashamed of it?
So when I just want to mention about my grandfather here. He was 94 when he passed away, and he was a Vedic scholar. He never went to temple, and he lost his vision when he was about 60 years, and he lost his wife also. But he would always sit by himself at home, and when I would ask him, Tata, if you're feeling bored, he would just ask me, you please explain what this word bored means. Because he even till the last breath he would keep chanting, not because he had to prove something to the world or not because he had to remember something, but I think he left back such a great message to all of us at home. And I think I felt very proud at that point of time, probably coming from a background where going to an English medium school, I felt that why should I chant or why should I do something. But the day he passed away, I think a lot of message hit me, and I agree with Janani, not doing things because we want our kids to do, because we want to do as an individual that I want to practice something, not because what society thinks or not because I want to prove something to my child.
Anybody else?
I think. Go ahead. Sorry.
Please
I was just going to make a point that probably we can start Namaste in the classes generally.
We do that, Nikhil, for Hindi and Kannada class.
Okay. So do you want to continue this meeting next month? Okay. I'll suggest a piece of homework for you. Alright. This is a book that I came upon about 2 weeks ago. Vaishali knows what I'm talking about. I'm very critical about the way our education system is going in this country. Yeah? Putting children into classroom and instruction. I can talk for hours at an end. Leave my talk. Here is a professor in Boston. He's a professor of education psychology. He's written this book called Free to Learn. His name is Peter Gray. I'll ask Vaishali to email the book details to you. It's a slightly expensive book in the sense that the paperback costs about 1,000 rupees. Kindle costs about 650 or something. It's worth reading. It's worth reading because this is not a theoretical exercise this man has done. He has started with his child. If you read just that beginning, you'll get it. And I'll tell you that part to give you the interest in the book. He talks of his child who's 8 or 9 years old at that time in the principal's room of the school. This is in America. I couldn't believe it. I didn't realize America was like this. And there he's facing 7 adults. The principal, the 2 parents and 4 teachers. And they're all trying to convince him, look, you have to do this. There's no way out. Right? And this little boy finally says, go to hell. Right? And both the parents start crying at that time. Then they realize, what are we doing to this child? Finally, the story goes, he removes him from the child. He then takes an interest in education psychology and starts researching that. And he gets involved with a school called Sudbury Valley School in the US. He's described that book there. If you have read Summerhill, you will understand what that school is like. It's quite like that. Right? The reason why that book touched me is 1983-84, we were doing exactly that in Valley School. Right? So what you are really saying is, look, you don't need to instruct a child. Your teaching doesn't bring any learning in the child. Learning comes when you play. Learning is a revelation. So let the child play. Even maths and physics at the highest levels is only play. Only then it's fun. Only then learning will happen. If you're only learning or studying with the intent of getting 99, 99, 99, you see what is happening today. Then you are headed for a different life. It's not worth it. Alright. So I'm only saying, it's not difficult for you to get this book, so just read it. And then maybe we can, next meeting, we can talk about why is it so difficult to bring play into study? Why is study a chore? I think it's interesting to explore that. Something becomes a chore only when you're pushed to doing it. So why is a child being pushed to learn? Every child has curiosity which is inherent in him. Is it that whatever be the size of the class, whether our classes are 15 children or other schools are 50 children, we are not able to allow each child to open out the way he is meant to open out? That's our problem, not the child's problem. Are we demanding conformity in the child? And conformity dulls, right? Are we really killing that inherent curiosity and spontaneity that every child has? School makes sure that it's killed. Are we doing that? Right? And what are the factors behind? If we can dialogue on that, what is the way out will come out. We don't need to say this is the system that we need to follow. No system is going to do it. So I think somewhere we need to explore this. What really is that movement of learning? What brings that about? What happens in that movement of learning? Is it something that is happening from the intellect, or it's happening from a deeper dimension of the human being? I can assure you, most of us, myself included, never asked these questions while we were teachers. And so when I'm asked today, I very happily say, doctors and teachers learn by experimenting on their patients and students. There's no other way you learn. So we have experimented, we have learned, but then those are the mistakes we made, right? So at least we should not perpetuate those mistakes. If something is transferred because of that experience, then some wisdom has been transferred. Otherwise it hasn't got across. So I really think we need to ask. So every child has this natural curiosity. Every child's eyes are wide open. They droop when they start coming to school. So that should be a wake-up call to us. Why is the child's eyes drooping? Right? And is that the only way of passing the exam and getting a job? Obviously not. Very clear to us. Once you have come to your age, you understand that job doesn't involve all that kind of study. But somewhere we need to bring that understanding into the child and into the education, at least in my relationship to the child. So that is really what I would like to suggest for the next meeting. Why is study not a play? There was a time, the children were unhappy when school weekend came because it was a holiday. They couldn't go to school. Right? Why should a child going to school have Monday morning, today is school? Why should that feeling come at any age? If you are not enthusiastic about what you are going to do that day, why? There's something wrong there, is there not? So I think we need to talk about that.
Uncle, to end that, to add to that, so today it was a perfect example of what you just said. So school was closed, and I think almost all the parents, sent a crying smile saying, the children are sad, and my own children were like so upset. So it's a good sign.
It's a good sign in class 1. Will that continue till class 12? Right? Where are we?
We have seen it at least till class 7, Uncle.
Yeah. Yes.
Why should it end after that?
Also.
No, why should it end after that? Why should it end at any time in life? I like Dr. B.M. Hegde's definition of healthy. Do you feel like getting up in the morning? Do you feel like going to work? You are healthy. Why should that enthusiasm not be there?
Current went in Valley School, Gopalan and Chandani.
I can hear you, but you can't see me. So, and I think one other question that came up was, what would be the best time for this meeting? This time it was kept at 5:30 because some parents said if it's a little later, it's easier by the time we get back from work, etc., etc. So you can probably, I don't know, send an email what would be the best time so that we work out a convenient time.
You have not noted down the name of the book, probably I'll send it.
Yeah, can you do it? Because I
And
don't have...
generally have the book. No?
We have the details, we will send.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, both the Kindle and the paperback. It's worth reading. But I don't think each one of you has to get a copy. If you can find a way of buying a few copies and sharing it around, it won't take you long to read it, I can assure you of that.
There is study center opening up there at Valley.
Yes, I believe from the 20th of this month. 1 minute, I'll just turn power on.
Gurvinder has sent us some protocols which have to be followed for just visit to study center and all those things.
No,
Gopalan, is it for?
Yeah, study center is opening to the public from the 20th. I think there's a mail coming.
We already received a mail.
You received the mail, and there are certain protocols. You need to be vaccinated, etc., etc., etc. But that is for individual stay. Yeah, there are no organized programs yet. No. So if you want to come and stay in the cottage, that's possible. You should be vaccinated. Yeah.
Visiting the center to study books or spend a couple of hours.
Possible. I think if you haven't got the email, I'll ask them to send it again. Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll plan another one meeting in December, I guess. We are following almost a 1 month schedule.
But
so we have 1 month to do our homework, Gopalan.
No. So let's be clear about the topic. I think that makes the focus very clear. Why is learning not play? All learning. Why should any subject be a burden to learn? Is it got to do with the subject itself, or is it got to do with the way we are pushing information down? Is something we need to ask.
Thank you, Gopalan uncle. Thank you so much. And thank you all the parents. It's lovely to see all of you. Thank you once again. See you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vaishu.
Bye.
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 Bye.